Appreciate those of you that have joined here today. We'll go ahead and get started. Let some others probably trickle in as well as we're going through this. But appreciate those of you that are here. Really what we wanted to talk a bit about today is how health systems can develop automation programs, but also look at other technologies that may not necessarily be what you view as automation today as ways to improve overall efficiency, revenue, costs, and the like. So from an agenda perspective, I'll have a couple of logistic items just really quick at the beginning here. From there, very, very quick overview, just who we are, so you know who you're talking to here. And then we'll get into managing and automation in healthcare and what a program looks like. We have some thoughts there and some organizations that we've been working closely with that have been successful in setting up both internal and external programs to manage the kind of evolution of technology right now. From there, a little bit around how to assess for different solutions, how to do prioritization of solutions, and some different ideas around the types of technology you might run across, what they mean, when to use them, things like that. And then lastly, we'll do a few example use cases at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to jump forward from here. First of all, just from a logistical standpoint, there is a Q&A option in the webinar. So if you do have a question, feel free to pop it into there. Ashwini is here with us. She's going to be fielding those questions, taking a look at what's out there, and then we'll answer as many as we can. We'll take a couple pauses throughout the presentation to allow you to jump in with questions that you might have, and then we'll hold some time at the end as well. And then lastly, we will be recording this. You may have heard the notice at the beginning that we are recording it. So we do plan to share that with everyone that's attended, and we'll also be posting it out on various social channels as well. Okay, so really quick overview about Rotera. First of all, I'm Erick McKesson, CEO and founder of Rotera. We started in early 2021, really with a goal to bring automation and other advanced technologies to the healthcare world. My background overall, I've been in the health tech and consulting space for about 17 years now, from Epic systems to consulting and various things in between. And then I also have Ashwini and Granger from my team with me today. They may jump in on some of the questions and all of that as well. But both of them deep healthcare backgrounds as well, from both technology consulting and operations perspective. In terms of who we are as a company, our mantra is really that we think to be scalable within the automation space, you need to look at a myriad of different things. It's not just one product from one company that you might be looking at. There's also custom automations that you might be building out that fall outside of a typical software purchase approach. And then there's often the need for services outside of your own internal organization, though, as we'll get into, we think there's a lot of power in building an internal program within your own health system as a whole. Our mantra as a company is that we want to empower health systems, really bring the various types of technology to them, but help train and teach an organization about how they can continue that journey when we're no longer around. And the goal being that we don't need to be here working alongside you for eternity. It's similar, as I'll get into in a later slide, to launching with other big technology solutions like an EHR, where you start to take on more and more of that in-house over time. A little bit about the genetics of the company. Again, lots of different healthcare technology consulting and some operations within healthcare as well make up our team. Really try to make a focus on blending healthcare technology expertise as a whole with automation expertise, consulting expertise, and knowledge of healthcare workflows and subject matter expertise as well. So that's our goal. It's to be well-rounded in that fashion, and all of our team members come from that kind of a background. Really quick on our solutions. We do things from the very beginning of automation strategy. What's the right type of technology to use? How do you build a program around using automation and other solutions? What does governance look like? All of that into design, development, and support. So actually creating things alongside you and your team members, providing support if necessary, or backing off and allowing organizations to take over more ownership of that for themselves in the long haul. And then lastly, we have a digital assistant tool called Alex that I'll also hit very quickly on as a part of this presentation. So I'm going to jump into the meat of the content. The main topic here to start is around managing automation in healthcare. What should it look like? What can it look like? There's a lot of different flavors. There's a lot of different new terms out there for everybody. And so we want to dive a little bit into that. First to start, one of my views of what I think has been happening in the industry overall over the past, several decades actually is, as many of you are aware, we were in a best of breed technology world, and a lot of lack of technology also early on in the industry. In the 2000s, the EHR really started to boom, and we saw a ton of consolidation. With that, health systems really started to, be kind of forced into obviously adopting the EHR. And in some cases, that led to also a very different sense of ownership of workflow. Things started to move in many cases much more towards IT with less operational capabilities to control what you're doing. And I think that, in my view, started to lead later on in the 2010s to a lot more niche solutions coming to market. So operators, started to look and say, well, with Epic or Cerner or whatever I'm using, I'm not able to do X, Y, Z. I'm not confident it's going to happen in time. And so a boom of new products started to come to market. A little later on in the late 2010s and into the 2020s is when really automation and AI started to be introduced into healthcare more significantly. And where I think we're at right now is a place where automation and AI is starting to mimic what happened with the EHR boom, where there's a sense of let's reconsolidate, let's find platforms that we can work with, and let's bring those inside the health system, manage those to the best degree that we can, and start to reduce our reliance on all of those niche little products that we might have in place today. With that comes obviously cost savings, as well as a little bit more control over the solutions that you're using as a whole, and hopefully better integration between them as well. Something I think is important with that, though, is if you went through that experience, you might have felt like a lot of the control was taken away from you within a given department, and it was difficult to make the transition and eventually get to a point where operations was having much more of that control back into how they use the electronic health record and other tools. I'm hopeful that in the automation world and in the AI space, we'll lead with a lot more operational knowledge and have ops very much heavy within the identification of solutions and thinking about the right products, the right priorities for the things that that are the real problems you're facing on a day-to-day basis. So that's sort of the mantra of some of this here. So how do we do it? The general sense is to internalize an operation or an operationalize an automation program. You need some degree of a center of excellence or some other governing type of structure that you use within your organization. There needs to be a degree of central intake and prioritization across many departments, though it may not always start that way. It may start much more with one department taking the lead, and we often see that in revenue cycle. And then, still making sure, though, that there is multidisciplinary governance. So we do need technical team members at the table, but we want to make sure that we're blending those with operators, as well as folks in HR, finance, accounting, supply chain, you name it. And HR is actually a really, really important one. There can be a lot of change management that we need to go through and potential retraining as a result of these types of programs. So that's sort of the general sense. The other thing to keep in mind is a lot of this is about cost savings, but that shouldn't be the only thing. There definitely can be labor savings. There can be revenue improvements as well. But also we need to focus on a lot of the qualitative impacts as well. So what's the experience of an employee today? What's the experience of a patient? And how do we take that into consideration as we're thinking about priorities for the organization as a whole? With that, I think it's very, very critical upfront that you start to think about what are my guiding principles as an organization. What are the things that we hold dear in terms of strategic initiatives? Is it revenue? Is it cost? Is it more of a focus on efficiency and user satisfaction? There's many things to consider there. We'll talk about a few other ones here in a bit. But aligning the entire organization or whoever is leading the charge to jump into an automation program is really, really critical. The other thing is to allow yourselves to start small and grow. So find things that you can do as a quick win and get the rest of your organization to see the successes and want to jump into a program and expand upon it. Oftentimes in the revenue cycle space, I think it's pretty common to jump to the big difficult challenges like managing authorizations, and those also tend to be some of the most difficult ones to see success in, and are also very costly potentially to deploy. So being smart about where do we start, and then how do we build the program bigger and bigger over time, and start to tackle the more complex challenges, or look to the third-party systems that are out there that might be, pumping a lot of research and development into those types of problems already. And then outside of that, it does need to be a management and leadership priority in order to be successful. There has to be agreement across not just team members that are going through these changes, but from the highest level of leadership all the way through all levels of management, that we're in this together. We're focused on quality. We're focused on still being patient-centered in what we do, and whatever else your specific strategic initiatives might be. So I think with that, there's 3 different deployment approaches that we see as fairly common. And we've seen varying degrees of success with different ones. There was certainly a period of time where I feel like most health systems were not quite ready to do it themselves. And so we were looking much more for point solutions or for someone to just manage it for us. So how do we do it more as a service? How do we outsource the idea of automating things at a bigger level? And what we're starting to see now, as I kind of alluded to in that earlier history repeating itself slide, is individuals within health systems wanting to bring more and more of that in-house and have more control of it. I think the important thing is to look at this still as you're probably going to need a blend. So there's some things that it makes sense for you to do internally to save on cost, and potentially also have IP ownership. There's organizations that are looking to, build revenue generating opportunities, things they can bring to market with other health systems out there. So certainly there's certain things that make sense to do internally. You might then want to look at that and say, well, maybe we augment that a little bit with external resources, makes it flexible. We can scale up, scale down, still have ownership of our own workflows that we're developing, and then, the IP around that if it exists. And not lose a lot of the things that you might lose by doing it yourself, by not doing it yourself, but allowing you to sort of start faster and avoid some of the learning curves that it takes to really ramp up on this newer type of technology. And then there's always point solutions. There's certain times where the most complex things, as I already alluded to, might have a really, really good point solution already in place, and it makes much more, cost and time sense to actually go with that point solution. So every single problem that we look at when we're talking about let's jump in and assess where we want to start should go through this as part of that review. Do we do it internally? Do we look to external support to build something for us, or do we buy a product? From here, I wanted to hit a little bit on how we see an automation center of excellence evolving. As I already kind of said, starting slow makes sense. Find a proof of concept. What are a couple things that you think you should roll out? And most likely to do that within 1 or 2 departments. So as I said, revenue cycle is common, but in some organizations, it might be supply chain that's leading the drive, or another department altogether. So find what that organizational unit is, identify some of those quick couple quick wins, get those live, build support, et cetera, and then start to expand from there, roll out additional automations, maybe add in another department or two. And then eventually you get yourself to this fully deployed center of excellence. And it might start to look not quite like what a EHR team looks like internally, but to a point where you do have developers and people doing testing and people doing solution design and workflow design internally that are running all of that, but then still a lot of operational involvement to really drive what are our problems today and what do we view as the solutions and how do we want to prioritize all of those things in the long haul. I won't go through these next slides in complete depth, but this is sort of an example. You might start in a proof of concept and say, we're going to have a small internal team. Let's say it's revenue cycle. We're going to have a program sponsor, a couple operational leads associated, and a project manager, and then training. So an important thing to call out there is that sometimes people view automation as not needing training because it's not a human task being done, but I think it's really important to train on what's changed and what people no longer have to do as well. And also there's workflow changes that can occur for them as a part of adopting an automation as well. So a lot of orgs start small and then use some external support to get them started. This is an example, again, a way that we've approached it with some other organizations where you might have an external technical lead, a solution architect that's out there designing workflows, and then a group of engineers actually developing things on your behalf. As you get through those initial stages, you start to expand some of your team internally. And I'll be clear, not everybody wants to do this. So there are still going to be organizations that say, we never want to build that team internally, or if we do, it's so far out in the future that we're not going to start there. And that's completely fine. But as you start to build up, it makes sense to start saving some cost and bringing some more and more of that expertise in-house. So bringing in some engineers that can actually develop, potentially looking at citizen developers, which is really non-technical or semi-technical people that live within a department that can do some of this programming themselves. With robotic process automation, at least, a lot of it is point and click and very graphical user interface based. So sometimes a lot of that work can be done without being an extremely technical person. There's other things like machine learning and the use of natural language processing and things like that much more often will require pretty specified technical resources. So you start to grow it here, and then one day, this is what you could end up looking like, where you have a full executive steering committee dedicated to the adoption and evolution of technology. You start to interlay that with sort of your existing enterprise steering committees that you might have in place. So that might be who's leading up EHR, innovation and optimization, other folks that are taking on other new technology approaches, strategy individuals that are thinking about patient experience and things like that. So start to blend more of this together. And it's no longer really just an automation center of excellence. It's actually much more of a system-wide innovation center of excellence. And from here, in terms of sample program timeline to get started, this is pretty common. We feel that within a 1-year period, you should have several bots running, whether they're bots or whether they're another technology, either way. But you're starting up front with some data gathering, more of an assessment phase, which we'll talk about more here in a second. You're setting up your infrastructure. What are the new technology products or platforms that we need to purchase to get started? Defining your program internally at the bottom side of, what is our program? How do we govern? What does change management look like? And as you're doing all of that, the idea is you're forming your initial team while you're starting to gather information about where you want to start and what your top initial priorities are going to be. And then you start getting into development and testing. And I think, this is where starting with, a blended team of internal and external expertise is probably important. If you don't do that, obviously you're going to be spending a lot of time up front on hiring people or retraining people. And it might take you a year or so to do that really well before you ever jump into testing or bot development at all. So that's sort of the model that we think is oftentimes looked at as the best way to go. But again, everyone operates a little bit differently. So from there, rolling go lives, and you just continue this process. Something to call out here as well is, as you're finding those initial ideas, you're not setting a priority for yourselves for 5 years, 10 years down the road. It's a short-term, immediate priority that's going to be constantly evolving. And so the concept of being agile, I think, is really important. You may feel like we've got a roadmap towards exactly what we feel like we need. We start getting into it, and other priorities might push that out, or we might find that we picked the wrong tool. Maybe robotic process automation was the wrong thing because there's actually a new EHR enhancement that we could have taken, and we might abandon something. So having that flexibility in the program, I think, is key. It's also a reason why having an internal program is valuable, because if you jump into a long-term license agreement on a specific product, your ability to back out of it later if there's some other change is much more difficult. So, okay, I'm going to pause there. That's the first kind of section that we wanted to go through, and see if any questions might have popped up here.
Yeah, we had one question. How do you manage the challenge of leaders from different parts of the organization all trying to compete for the same limited development resources?
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult one. I think it's related. It's similar to other technologies outside of this, where everybody's got their own set of priorities. I jump back to the very beginning. We were talking about the importance of governance and a multidisciplinary team. That is really critical, and it has to be led by high level leadership to say we're going to stick to our methodology for prioritization. And we'll talk a little bit about that actually in the next section. What's a good way to think about prioritizing? So I think it's that you're setting your guns up front on how you prioritize across departments, and you're sticking to it. And if you have all management and leadership on board with that approach, it makes it much less of an argument about when are we coming next. So that's the main thing for my mind. Any others out there?
That's it for now.
Okay. All right. So moving into an approach towards assessment and prioritization. I wanted to start here with just a couple quotes from some recent news articles. Some of these have been going on for a while, but you may have heard about stupid stuff. And I think it's a really important one to think about yourselves internally if you haven't already. But there are hundreds and hundreds of different mundane small things that people are doing every single day, whether that's in an EHR, whether that's in an ERP, whether that's in a CRM, whether that's on various payer websites, or even internally going through SharePoint and spreadsheets and everything else. I would implore people, as you're thinking about assessing what to do, and not just where to start, but what to do in the long haul as well, to find some of those stupid things that you have to do. And I think it's important because it will help garner the interest in not just driving revenue and cost, as we talked about, but also how are we improving the lives of the employees of the health system and the patients as well. So I think it's an interesting idea. Some health systems have done a really good job implementing it across the board, and part of that approach is really thinking about, as the bottom one says here, crowdsourcing ideas from the organization and getting everyone's engagement, and what are the things that I have to do that I shouldn't have to do. So I just wanted to start with that. As we think about an assessment process and jumping a little further in, I think number one is, if you're starting a new program and you're not already doing some of this, who is going to be the champion? I think we've seen a couple different ways. And as I already said, oftentimes revenue cycle has a lot of those stupid things already identified and want to take the lead and jump into it. And that's totally great. In other organizations, it might be clinical administration trying to solve for provider burnout, or other areas like that. And in others, it's IT. There are cases where IT is jumping in and saying, we're going to help revolutionize all these things, and we're going to get the operational support and participation. But either way, to get started, someone needs to be a champion of the program as a whole, and help push it along. From there, an interesting, related to this stupid stuff, define user journeys. I think it's an interesting way to look at doing an assessment, is to not just go out and talk to people and look at systems and find, workflows that seem inefficient, but take individual users. So a billing rep, a unit clerk, a scheduling rep, whoever it may be, and try to really map out their entire end-to-end process. What do they do, inside and out, and use that to find all of the little inefficiencies that might be occurring. And some of those might become great, great solutions for RPA, robotic process automation. Others you might look at and say, well, really, that's too small to take on the amount of time it would take for us to implement that type of solution. But here's something else we could do. Maybe we can deploy a chatbot or a digital assistant, or maybe there's a different model where the problem is data and we need to deploy machine learning. So I'll talk about some of those in a little bit more, but going at this from a user journey perspective, I think is an interesting way to look at it. With that, like I said, define the inefficiencies and headaches within those journeys, and then, prioritize from there. So taking that a step deeper, we really do feel that within less than a 2-month period of time, you should be able to do a pretty thorough pilot analysis of what are all the potential challenges within that given department you want to start with. Let's start with mapping out what we think they are, build those user journeys, collect some data points that we might need to, show that there's an ROI or an impact to some degree, or a qualitative impact. Do some analysis on the right tool, move into your prioritization grid, which we'll show here in a bit, and then report it out to your own executive team. These are the things that we think are important and why, and the value we're going to drive from them, and get high level alignment on that. And also go through what your implementation plan is going to look like. Going back to what I said earlier on the implementation plan, be clear and upfront with your own team members and with your own leadership that there is a degree of variation in developing these types of things. And so oftentimes that implementation plan is a guess. I think some people can hit that guess very well, and many times beat it. But in some cases, it might change and evolve over time. This is related to the user journey. I just wanted to use an example for really a patient. What's a patient's journey look like from being engaged for the first time, having outbound marketing to them and things like that, into effectively being scheduled and having financial clearance, into registration and questionnaires and the clinical aspect of their visit, and then into re-engagement and how they, are getting their follow-up appointments done, or how they're, completing their referrals, or how they are, being maintained as a patient within your health system or with a specific provider. I think it's as important to look at this as it is user journeys. Obviously, there's a lot in the consumer space these days in healthcare. So I just wanted to use this as a quick example of a very high level journey from more of the patient perspective. So we've done a deal of an assessment. We've started to gather a bunch of ideas. We've taken those in. We're starting to look at how do we assess these and prioritize them now. The next step is to really think about, well, what's the right tech for this? So we've got a list of things we think we want to do. Is this something that we should just go back and put into the EHR? Is it a digital assistant? Is it RPA, robotic process automation? Is there more of a niche product, machine learning? Is this voice technology? But step one, we really need to understand what is the tech, and then from there we can start to go back towards that model I showed at the beginning of, is this a let's do it ourselves internal thing? Is it an external thing where we need an external developer? Or is there a product that we want to purchase? So taking all of these scenarios through both the right tech and then the right team or company to work with as well is sort of the next phase of the assessment. So I threw a lot out there about, these different types of technology. Just to highlight a few of these quickly. Most of you are probably very well aware of robotic process automation. It's been a really, loud thing in healthcare recently. The idea here is doing what a human can do via clicks. So trying to take a very standardized process that has high volume, where we can go out and click around on a screen and perform some action, and putting that into an automated mode. Very effective at what it can do there. The potential downside, of course, is systems change, screens change. There's obviously maintenance involved in keeping these things running in the long haul. Can have a pretty good impact. Some RPA solutions are driving millions of dollars in impact if you look at it from a cost perspective. Certainly driving efficiency and user experience. From a timeline perspective, medium to long, there are some that are fairly quick. We've seen them less than 3 months. Sometimes even within a couple of weeks, you can get some basic automations in place. And then some are 12-month long projects. So pretty variable in terms of what the timeline can look like there. I mentioned digital assistants. I already kind of alluded to the fact that this is an area Rotera definitely plays in. We have a product called Alex that is a digital assistant platform. The idea with this type of solution is to bring data to individuals to help them in their workflow. So they're not having to jump to 10 different systems, or scour through spreadsheets or policies or procedures, or your latest insurance contract information, for example. So trying to aggregate that content, make it searchable and on the fly accessible, and reduce the number of systems that an individual user has to use. Some of these are very small, stupid things, back to that you might just need one little data point from a spreadsheet, and you are tired of going and finding that spreadsheet, or it's always out of date and you need the latest version, you have to find it in your email. Others can be very high impact, like helping to manage your entire call center scheduling process. So lots of variability there. Tend to be pretty quick builds and low maintenance as a whole. Generative AI has been getting a lot of news lately. The idea of using large language models, so lots of data to produce content. These are things that can also be used alongside a digital assistant or chatbot. And so the idea with this is more, it's variable data. There's a lot of content. We need to infer what an answer to a problem or a question may be. One of the things to be aware of is that generative AI today still has the concept of what they call hallucinations, where it produces what sounds like a very real answer to something, but actually it was fairly made up. There's a lot of work being done to improve upon that, and there's a lot of ways to rely on your own specific content rather than ChatGPT of the entire internet, to really whittle that down and make it much more effective. And you're also interrelating some different types of search techniques alongside it. Process mining is another solution that's out there that some organizations have been going through. This is the idea of sort of tracking how users work and trying to understand the workflows that they're performing, and then try to tie that to an outcome. So, we may have 20 different people working in a department, all doing the same type of work, but in slightly different ways. And at the end of the day, which route that we took is leading to, in rev cycle, a payment versus a denial, for example. So trying to correlate the user workflow to an actual outcome can be applied outside of revenue cycle as well, obviously. Variable impact as well on this one. And generally a fairly long build. There's a lot of data analysis that goes into that type of tech. Next up, natural language processing, the ability to understand speech and do something with it. This also relates to the one after that, conversational AI and chatbots. They use natural language processing and understanding, but turn it into a way to actually converse with an individual. So whether that's through a conversational AI via a phone, where you're talking to a patient and understanding what they're asking for, and then giving them a response that's trained, or whether that's through a chatbot. So lots of, significant technology enhancements have been coming out in these areas over the past couple of years. Computer vision and OCR, one that is, OCR has been used for a long time, obviously, to read scanned images, read EOBs, things like that. Computer vision is sort of a tweak on OCR to be able to read a screen that's in front of you as it's moving and understand the buttons and the text and the various, components of that screen, and then say, hey, I found a button that says submit, I'm supposed to go press that. Often, very much often used alongside robotic process automation or other tools to actually act upon the outcome of it. And then lastly, machine learning, tend to also be very long, for the most part, implementations. It's a lot of data you're analyzing to try to figure out from all of this data, how do I infer something that's valuable to the organization? So an example I always like to use in the denials space again is, let's take the past year's worth of claims and also payments and denials, and start to use machine learning to correlate them to each other to understand when are we getting paid versus when are we getting denied, and what are the things that are leading to the denial. And then we might say, let's take that and merge it with, say, a digital assistant to bring training material to the end user now, so they understand that this is the optimal flow that's led to payment, and still let them decide if that's the right thing to do, but giving them that data. And you might also then take it a step further and say, well, let's let that user say, based on that, I want to perform an appeal with X information. And now maybe I kick off robotic process automation to go actually produce that and send it out. So another just example of how these might fit together, but machine learning, very much data-driven approach, trying to infer some sort of outcome based on the information you have. Another thing on this is, I'm going to get to the prioritization slide here in a second, but value and benefits included. You want to look at both qualitative and quantitative, as we already said. There's obviously labor costs, gross revenue improvements that can be made, supply spend, reducing denials. Something that people often don't think about as much as maybe reducing the cost of other vendors as well. So if I'm using a specific vendor for something, now I have some sort of automation platform in-house. Could I replace that vendor and have some cost savings there? Reducing length of stay, et cetera. But then again, really, really important to also think about qualitative impacts, employee satisfaction, patient satisfaction, clinical quality, and the likes. So in terms of prioritization, there's obviously a million different ways that you can slice this. This is a model that we like to use right now. 3 different timeline drivers and 3 different value drivers. From a timeline perspective, how long is it going to take for us to do it? Does the cost to implement outweigh that value based on the timeline? Organizational readiness. Do we have the information we need? Do we have the systems in place to do this work? Standardization, is it truly standardized? Do we understand what the right flow is? If not, maybe we want to go look at process mining first to figure out a better approach, or maybe machine learning to better infer from the data. And then on the value side, value is not just cost and revenue again, but the qualitative ones as well. What do we view as organizational priorities? And some of those may be, again, clinical quality standards or things like that. Longevity. So is this something that is just a short-term acute problem, or is there some change down the road that might change it? I'm going to go back to the authorization example, because I think it's a valid one. There's a lot of work and energy and time and cost into solving for automation of the auth process. But what we don't know yet is, will CMS pass the proposed rule to require that at least Medicare payers accept electronic authorizations, the 278 interface messages. If they do that, most of the commercial payers will probably follow suit. It's surprising that they haven't already. It's been out there forever. But maybe that's something we should consider about. Do we want to jump into something big like that when there may be a direct replacement direct from the EHR coming down the line here? And then alternatives, again, can we do this in the EHR, in the ERP, et cetera? Is there different alternatives? Is there some other workaround that makes sense? All of these can get their own weights. So some organizations might put the highest weight on value and much less on others. We generally like to have a somewhat balanced weight between all of these, but it's something that you work through as you're looking at your own assessment results and saying, somehow we graded this one as top priority. It doesn't make any sense. And if you agree to that from a leadership perspective, then maybe there's some tweaks that need to be made to how you're looking at prioritization as a whole. From there, the idea is to put it on a grid, take some of your examples that have come out, score them through the weighted cycle before, and put them again as value versus effort and see which ones are high value for lower effort. Start there and then start to work your way to the right and eventually down as well. I will say there are sometimes some things that are low or medium value, but extremely low effort that also might just make sense to do. And going back to some of the stupid things that we've talked about already, I think a lot of those might fit there where it's, hey, we could, do this in a week. It may not have a $500,000 impact to the organization, but it solves a pain point qualitatively that makes sense. So, maybe we actually should. All right, I'll pause again if anybody has any questions out there.
No questions right now.
Okay. All right, so last section, and then I'll pause it one more time. Again, feel free to jump in the Q&A at any point in time and add some questions. And then, we'll have one more open section for questions. So in terms of use cases, I just wanted to throw out a few different examples that we've seen. I already said this, but remember, it's important to recognize that a solution might have multiple different technologies tied together, or might have multiple different technologies as their own potential standalone solution. So maybe you do have a product that you buy, or maybe you have a automation that you could build, or maybe there is an EHR optimization that you could do. Or maybe there's again a digital assistant. Potentially any of those could solve for the same problem, or in the case of that denials example I gave, maybe stringing together 3 or 4 of them is the best solution that's out there. So as an example for that, with RPA, ML, and digital assistants, and areas where we see crossover sometimes. There's things that are very pure RPA, doing status checks, importing invoices into your AP system. Machine learning, you could have a standalone denials analysis solution, or you could tie it together with other things if you wanted to. Prior authorization, you might have a combination of using machine learning to understand your medical necessity rules and also the requirements for documentation to be submitted, but then you might use some RPA to actually go and do the submission of the status checks of those. On the digital assistant side, you might have some things that are very much knowledge driven in a call center, for example, or customer service team. You just want to provide data to individuals as it is. Or maybe you tie it together with something like coverage discovery, and you give your billing team the ability to identify missed insurances post-denial via an assistant. So again, these types of things can blend together or can stand alone in many different cases. I believe this is my last slide. So I just wanted to throw out some areas that we've seen a lot of interest and a lot of folks implement. Different types of automation and other technologies. RevCycle, obviously, we've talked about prior auth a little bit already, coverage discovery, credit scoring, doing claim statusing, denials in many different ways there. There's some great solutions out in the market for auto coding. And, some of the EHRs did that themselves in some degrees, but now there's some very sophisticated SaaS type of products out there that are doing it as well. There's different assistants in scheduling and references, et cetera. Supply chain, we see a lot in the inventory space and purchase order space. as well as just overall sourcing and getting into more ML type models around how to improve and reduce spend. In the clinical world, panel management, this is an area around how do you figure out which patients are no longer seeing certain PCPs and remove them from their panels so they can free it up for other patients. So kind of quasi-clinical, a little bit administrative, clinical documentation improvement and pushing assistant type content up to a physician at the time of documentation, doing, ED charge capture automation, improving OR scheduling, utilization, various things like that. HR, staff scheduling, onboarding. Onboarding is a really common one. And then also managing licensing and renewals is pretty common. And then a host of other things in, IT has often looking at things like managing password resets, managing initial replies to submitted tickets based on the content of the ticket, or potentially using some RPA to do other solutions beyond things like passwords as well. They also get involved on the onboarding side with HR for provisioning access to systems based on user roles. So if you have a new person joining with a specific job description, we know what systems they need to be given access to and what functions, automating that type of process as well. Customer service, et cetera. So, a pretty wide variety of things that are out there. This is kind of scratching the surface, really. But just to give you guys a sense of some of the really common ones that we've been running into. All right. I think that's really it. If there's any other final questions from the group, we'll sit here for a minute and see if we can get anybody to jump in with one.
We have one question. What areas do health systems typically begin with for automation?
I think I do still think revenue cycle is the most common. There's obviously a lot of administrative duties, and a lot of them are overly complicated with how we interact with insurance companies and with patients as well, and the complexities of that kind of three-way relationship. So I think there's often a lot of more frustration there. The other side to that is, especially on the clinical side, most people are a little bit more hesitant to get started there, especially as it relates to potential patient, care related automations. So we haven't seen as many people start in that realm, or as many clinical administrators jumping in and saying, we're going to lead the charge. But I would say revenue cycle for sure. Supply chain has been probably a number two, or maybe finance. Finance actually has a lot of pretty routine things as well, that have been pretty common, but yeah, rev cycle is probably number one still.
One more question that just came in. What should the skill set of a champion be for organizing, collection, and prioritization of ideas? Is this usually an existing role or a new position?
I'll answer the second question first. If you can budget for it, I would really suggest having a separate new position for it, or taking someone that you can roll out of another position into it. But it can very easily be a full-time job. If you have enough external support, you might not need a full-time resource to take that charge, but there's going to be a significant amount of time helping navigate the organization, find the right opportunities, get politically get buy-in, and then also just get into the nitty-gritty of the design and supporting through testing and all of that. So for the second part of that, I think you should be planning to probably have a resource that is leading and championing this as a whole. In terms of the type of individual, I do think it helps to have a pretty analytical mindset, somewhat technical, but doesn't have to be like an engineer or or anything like that. Business analysts can do well if they're a little more, technically inclined business analyst, or have worked, really closely alongside folks that are, managing your EHR, for example. And then also it could be someone within, say, your EHR team that wants to move on to something else and understands so many of your different workflows already, will know if it should just be native to the EHR or is something that's really external. So we've seen some success with those types of positions as well.
Those are all the questions.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm happy I was able to get through that in time. I was worried I might not, but I appreciate everyone again joining. Like I said, we will send out a video recording. So look for that. I don't know how long it'll take for this to finish, but we'll get it out as soon as we can. If you do have any questions, you may have my email. Please reach out that way. I'm on LinkedIn and active there. You can always find me that way, or go to rotera.ai and find a way to contact us there as well. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great rest of the week.